Thank you all very much. Welcome back. As I said before, this Professor Mark Packard. Mark Packard's at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I believe you're a graduate of the University of Missouri, correct? Is that where you got your PhD?
Yes.
And Professor Bylund, I believe, also was at the University of Missouri. Did you know each other while you were there?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
He was 2 years ahead of me, but yeah, we met several times.
That's great. Dr. Packard, I texted you, I wasn't sure. Dr. Packard's not just an academic, he also has a business consulting entrepreneurs. So he's not just someone who works in academia, he's also out there in the real world doing these types of things. Dr. Packard has numerous publications, especially, and this is just really an honor to have you here. And I hope everybody listens and you're gonna learn a lot. And these are things that are really important to us here in Gadsden. So we want to thank you very much for doing this. I'm going to transfer the host over to you right now. If anyone has questions, wait till the end. I sent out a little message on how to raise your hand. Most people seem to already know how to do it. Thank you very much, Dr. Packard.
All right. All right, are you seeing the presentation?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Is Per still on? I kind of laughed when Per started his presentation, and I should have expected this, and we should have collaborated a little bit, but we're going to cover a little bit of the same ground. Not surprising, Per and I, if you don't know, we have been friends for several years, and we've been co-authoring on much of this work together. So it's not surprising that what he had to say overlaps a lot with what I wanted to say. But he went more into the kind of the practical, so what, like what can you do as an entrepreneur to be more successful? And I'm going to focus more on what role does entrepreneurship play in the economy itself, and why do entrepreneurs matter so much to economies? And so he did touch on that a bit, especially at the beginning, and you'll see, obviously I'm going to start with the exact same tweet that he did here, which is brilliant. It's a brilliant insight, very simple, but extremely profound. And so I want you to think about it a little bit. What causes poverty? Poverty is the default state. This is what we call the state of nature, right? Philosophers will call this the state of nature. When we are alone in nature, just like if we found ourselves, just kind of, naked, without anything, without anyone, just in nature, the state of Adam without Eve. Do we have anything? Well, there's a lot of resources around us, but we don't really necessarily have wealth yet, right? The original starting point is poverty. We don't have, and it's survival. We are trying to survive. That was the natural state of mankind. It's prosperity, it's wealth that was created. And that is not the natural state of mankind. Have you ever seen the history of the world in terms of GDP? This is what it looks like. Starting at, basically 1 AD. If you go before Christ, it'll look just as flat. But isn't this fascinating? The whole history of mankind has been poverty. Struggling to survive, right? We're just scraping by. Can we live the next year? Can we survive the winter? And then something changed. What happened here? All of a sudden, the world has become this very wealthy place. Not everywhere, but especially here in America, but in most places, even in the poorer countries, they have become massively more wealthy, and their ability to survive has completely changed. But what happened? What changed? There's a lot of possible answers here. Some will say, it was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment happened just before this. You might say this was kind of where capitalism started, right? Where America was founded, right? In the Constitution or something like that, right? And those aren't bad answers. In fact, they're probably, especially, they're probably linked, but the actual answer, and I'm going to try to justify this, is entrepreneurship, right? So the Enlightenment, or the emergence of capitalism, or the emergence of free markets, and or the Constitution, they all had a causal role in facilitating or enabling entrepreneurship. But it's really entrepreneurship ultimately that is the driver of this growth. But again, like I said, this graph shows just kind of the aggregate data, but not every country kind of really followed this trend. We've got a lot of countries that are still way behind. And so this is, again, comes back to Per's tweet. What causes prosperity? Why did these countries, Hong Kong, the US, Singapore, the UK, Japan, what led them to become this little group that is wealthy where other countries did not? Again, I'm going to claim that this is entrepreneurship, but let's see if I can justify this historically. Let's talk about some of these countries. I want to start with France. I don't have France on this one, but if you look at the GDP of France over time, it's pretty interesting. And the reason why I want to start with France is because France was the wealthiest of the countries before whatever changed. So in the kind of the Middle Ages, France was kind of the world leader in wealth and GDP. So let's talk about the history of France. Just FYI, this data comes from the Madison Project. It's benchmarked to the US dollar 2011. So if you are interested in this data, that's where you can find it. It's called the Madison Project with 2 Ds. Okay, so a few things to note here. Let's start with this flat period, right? These are the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. Why is there no growth here? Why do we even call them the Dark Ages, right? So the economic structure of this time was the feudal system. You're probably familiar with the feudal system. It was it's kind of a solid system for value management, for economic management at the time. Obviously unjust, but it worked for them at the time. But the problem is it inspires absolutely no entrepreneurship. Lords were well-to-do and engaged, primarily in ensuring the productivity of their serfs and the protection of their properties, right? That's what they cared about. But serfs didn't have any motivation to innovate because they didn't have any claim on the benefits of any innovations, right? Whatever additional productivity they came up with, that was captured by their lord, and they didn't really get anything from it. And the middle class, and there was a middle class, it was just small, the middle class was dominated by the trade guilds, which were basically like unions. So they had very strict and union-like controls over their industry. They were basically able to push out anyone that tried to enter that weren't part of the guild and stuff like that. They had some protections by the magistrates. And so these dark ages were so dark because entrepreneurial creativity was squelched by this feudal system and by the guilds. There was virtually no economic growth for centuries. Very little innovation, and completely just a struggle to survive. Then we get to the Renaissance here before this, around the end of the Dark Ages, we call the Enlightenment, the Age of the Enlightenment. In France, it was the Renaissance, right? In the Renaissance, if we zoomed in on this at that time period in the kind of the 1800s, late 17th century and 18th century, you would be able to see some economic growth. There was some development here. And like I said, France at this point was kind of leading the way. They were leading with the arts and economic development. They had some of the best universities and the largest economy at that time. But still, I mean, that growth is nothing compared to what we would see in just the next century. Of course, the Enlightenment that kind of emerged out of that Renaissance period is really where this things take off, but France didn't. You could see the UK, and then after that, the United States. The UK is the yellow line, and the United States is the blue line. They start to take off kind of at the same time as France, but France doesn't grow as fast as those other countries. That leads to a question of why. So arguably, it's because of Napoleon's policies. Napoleon was myopically focused on applied science. He was extremely supportive of his academic, his biologists, his physicists, and the applied sciences that were happening at the universities called the École Polytechnique, I think. And they had like some of the brightest minds of the whole world, right? So they had Lagrange, they had Laplace and Poisson and Fourier, Ampere. So all these physicists were just dominating the engineering and the physics field. But no one knew what to do with it. They had all this cool knowledge coming out of academia, but they didn't have any entrepreneurs to apply them, to innovate with them, with that knowledge, right? Napoleon financed some innovation, but it was almost all on military expenditures, right? Military armaments. And then another constraint was that the French aristocracy disdained entrepreneurship. They were very protectionist of their own, because entrepreneurs threatened their wealth, right? So anyone coming in to the market, they would use whatever power they had to push them back out. And then, of course, the French Revolution entailed a ton of war debt. And so Napoleon ended up taxing the market severely to pay for those war debts. So the taxes really constrained entrepreneurship also. Another couple of points here. These dips here were the world wars. And so they were having some okay growth up to that point, but not great. But it's after the Second World War that all of a sudden things turn up. And so what happens there is that there was an economic restructuring there that was led by Charles de Gaulle, where basically entrepreneurship was no longer stifled. De Gaulle would claim responsibility for it in terms of his policies and stuff, but really wasn't specific policies. It was the fact that they stopped inhibiting entrepreneurship that really led to this, right? And as a final note, you can see kind of at the tail end here, things have really slowed down, and France has never fully gotten all the way up to the same level as some of these other first world countries. And it's likely due to a very high comparative regulatory burden, taxes and regulations. The French government is right now trying to reignite the entrepreneurial spirit. They're trying to change the French culture a little bit toward entrepreneurship. We'll see if it works, but that's where France is today. All right, so let me let's talk about our own US of A and our history. The US basically gets its start. We are founded as a nation basically right after the Enlightenment. And in particular, we're founded upon those Enlightenment principles, in particular those of Locke, that life, liberty, and property idea, which basically means the basis of the American political system is free markets, that is no or minimal regulatory burden, and thus the unleashing of or facilitation of entrepreneurship, which is fascinating. This is a huge experiment, political experiment in the world. And exponential economic growth started almost immediately. We have all kinds of great innovations in that time. Obviously, Ben Franklin was a brilliant innovator, but after that, we had the locomotive. We developed kerosene. Carnegie developed steel. Of course, we've got the electric light. So Edison and Tesla's battle with for the light and electricity. Henry Ford with the automobile. The U.S. was pumping out innovation after innovation after innovation that was changing the whole world. And those were happening more and more frequently than anywhere else. That is what's causing this growth. And so by the end of the 20th century, by the beginning of the 20th century, Americans are in love with innovation. Our heroes are these entrepreneurs and innovators. And so this is kind of ingrained in the American culture. And then you see, of course, the dip right here, which is the Great Depression. To explain the Great Depression, I don't want to go too far into it. There's a lot of different historical explanations for this, especially in the economics history. I tend to accept, Murray Rothbard has a very interesting explanation of the Great Depression that I think is probably the most correct. But whatever the reason, the rate of entrepreneurship in the Great Depression just plummeted. So the stock market crash happened. It scared people. They weren't investing like they were before. And then comes in FDR with the regulatory, the New Deal, and tries to fix things by employing people, but those investment dollars aren't going to entrepreneurship. They're going to work projects. And so a lot of them were wasteful, right? So this is kind of we call it the Keynesian view. John Maynard Keynes was an economist that basically tried to explain the Great Depression as kind of this lack of consumption. And so he proposed that you could stimulate the economy by just getting consumption going again. So that was what FDR and the US government tried, and it just wasn't working. And the reason why is because entrepreneurship was getting starved. It's not just consumption. Growth, consumption, if we just consumed, we would have no growth. Right? That is the history, the tradition of humankind. It's entrepreneurship, it's innovation that actually improves the state of the economy. And so that is what causes economic growth. And so by taking investment dollars by taxing and moving those investment dollars to work projects and consumption. Those dollars weren't going to investments in entrepreneurship. And so there wasn't any growth. So at the time, there was a little bit of technology that was developed as a result of the war, but most of it was military technologies. And so it wasn't contributing to actual human well-being. It was really contributing to the war effort, which was more destructive than anything. But by the end of the war, Keynes and a lot of the economists were freaking out because all of a sudden, that work effort and that spending that was going on for the war was about to run dry. With the war was ending, and all of a sudden we weren't going to have all this stuff to spend on. So all these economists are freaking out. This is going to be a disaster. What happened? The soldiers came back, they got to work, and we had a spike in growth instead. So the economists got it wrong at that time. And basically what happened is what we call the broken window fallacy. If we have time, I'll come back to that. But instead of stagnation after the war, when the government stopped spending, we had this massive uptick in growth because innovation and entrepreneurship was happening again. Soldiers coming back had to find jobs. If they couldn't find a job, there weren't a whole lot of jobs at the time. They had to make a job. They had to be entrepreneurs and start something. And so that is what happened. The entrepreneurial spirit was reignited after the war. And to this day, entrepreneurship is still a core American value. But note at the very end of this tale, this graph, our entrepreneurship, our growth is kind of tapering a bit. And so why is that happening? There's, again, a lot of possible explanations, but arguably it's because we are turning away again from entrepreneurship and bravely taking on innovations and improving, and we're trying to protect our existing businesses. We're trying to save jobs instead of letting them be destroyed in favor of more productive jobs. So entrepreneurship is this process of what we call creative destruction. You don't have growth, you don't have creation without the old being destroyed. And so if you try to protect the old, you have to do that by saving them from entrepreneurs. You know, obviously most protectionist policies in the US are protecting against foreign investments and foreign entrepreneurs. But in the actual kind of process of it, it's the same. If you're protecting against foreign entrepreneurs, you're preventing, you're forcing people to pay for the higher local prices, and you're costing yourself at the expense of better options, opportunities that could be done instead of those protected businesses. Just to kind of, as a simple example, you know, if you're going to make a pie, or if you want to eat a pie, you have the option of making it yourself for $10 or buying it from the grocery store for $5. Now, there might be some utility in making a pie, but if it's cheaper to buy it than it is to make it yourself, then you could spend that time and that extra money doing something else. You can use that money that you saved in that time to be entrepreneurial, but you're not if you're doing it yourself. If you're making that pie yourself, that is wasted productivity. And that's what ends up happening in the US at this tail end, I think. I hope that makes sense. Let's go to China here. China's at the bottom. But historically, classically, if you look at the history of China, it's one of the most innovative cultures in world history. But modernly, it's become this huge laggard. It's way at the bottom and impoverished comparatively. Of course, you can see this little uptick at the very end. Recently, its latent entrepreneurial spirit has kind of re-emerged maybe, but so far only in small increments. So its modern history really begins with the Communist Revolution and the rise of Mao Zedong in 1949. At that time, there was a lot of optimism around communism and the possibilities of it as an economic system. And Mao launched his Great Leap Forward program in 1958, but it was a disaster. So not only did it not budge the economy forward, let me see, I've got it here. Not only did it not budge the economy forward, but it resulted in a famine that resulted in the deaths of millions, starvation of millions of people. The weather was actually quite good for agriculture, but the agricultural labor was diverted by the Great Leap Forward to steel and construction. And so crops ended up getting left unharvested and rotting. And then there was this 4 Pests campaign, where they were trying to eliminate these pests. Like there were, locusts and sparrows and all these little pests that were kind of driving the country mad. And so the 4 Pests campaign tried to get rid of these pests, and they first started with sparrows. And so they got rid of most of the sparrows, but the sparrows were the predators of the locusts. And so by getting rid of the sparrows, they created this even worse scourge of locusts, and that just kind of exacerbated the famine. And anyway, so the story here is just tragic. So China just basically proved incapable of central planning its economy. The entrepreneurship at this time was basically nothing. And finally, as Chinese, they kept their populace kind of self-contained, where they couldn't really see a whole lot of what was going outside of the world, in the rest of the world. But eventually it became so apparent that this wasn't working, that there was an economic reform in 1978. And in this reform, they basically realized that central planning needed to be cut back. They didn't give up their communist ideals, but they cut back on the central planning aspect of it and let the individual Chinese kind of pursue some of their own businesses and do things without strict oversight by the regulators. And so they started to open up and unleash entrepreneurship to some extent. And that's where you start to see this growth. But you can still see that China's growth is still lagging, right? The defenders of central planning, which there are still a lot of economists and people that defend central planning as an effective approach to economics. They point to China as the fastest growing in the world. Now you can look at this data and see they're not really the fastest growing. Though what those people are saying is that as a percentage of GDP, it's the fastest growing, which is true, right? Relative to almost zero, their growth is huge, as a percentage. But you can see the raw numbers, and so they are still lagging. And so the point here is China's a great example of how central planning doesn't work because it inhibits entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship cannot be planned. It is just kind of random insights. They are innovation comes to different people at random times, and you just don't know who's going to have that insight. And so when you regulate an economy, you are impeding the ability of those economic actors to either see those opportunities or to take advantage of them, to exploit them, to actually pursue them in entrepreneurship. And that stagnates the economy. And China is a great example of that. Now, Per already mentioned Hong Kong in his presentation. I'm just going to follow up a little bit on that. So you can see Hong Kong is a very different trajectory compared to China, which is that blue line at the bottom. But they are basically the same culture, the same origin story. Hong Kong was China up until basically that, the 1950s. So again, the data for Hong Kong starts at the same time as China, right? With that communist revolution, and the opponents of communism within China basically escaped China, and many of them went to Hong Kong. Some went to Singapore and some other places also. I'll talk about Singapore in a second. But those kind of refugees from China integrated into the economy, but it was slow going. It was difficult to integrate this flood of immigrants into Hong Kong for a while. But these were kind of culturally entrepreneurial in nature, these Chinese. And so they made what work for themselves. So the integration wasn't too difficult because they didn't basically take jobs from the existing populace. They made their own jobs. And so while the Hong Kong government was kind of preoccupied with this immigration problem, they ended up leaving the economy alone. They didn't bother with economic restrictions and regulations. And even today, still today, the low taxes, low regulations characterize Hong Kong's economy. And as a result, that entrepreneurial spirit that the Chinese immigrants kind of brought over, although arguably you could say Hong Kong's populace was already somewhat entrepreneurial, that really sparked this growth trajectory. And you can see it basically starts growing really fast right away. And you can see a little bit of a blip here where it's kind of stagnates a little bit. At that time, there was a reintegration with China. China basically took back Hong Kong as a province. So it is no longer its own independent nation. It's now a part of China. That was in 1997. But China still left Hong Kong essentially independent to operate autonomously at the time. And so Hong Kong was still able to kind of pursue its own destiny, and the entrepreneurship continued, and you can see it grew into one of the most wealthy nations in the world. Now, I don't know if you've been following what's going on in Hong Kong now. Actually, I haven't actually followed it in a while, but in the last year or two, there's been a lot of turmoil because China has been trying to bring Hong Kong all the way into China and reintegrate it into the communist China system. And the Hong Kong citizens are really resisting it, and for good reason. I mean, you look at this, Hong Kong has been extremely successful as an autonomous nation or province because it has been independent from the communist China policies that, if you look at that blue line, have inhibited China's growth. And so if Hong Kong does get fully integrated into China, it's hard to know what would happen to its growth. And I very likely would expect that it would flatten severely, but we'll see. Let's turn finally to Singapore, because I think Singapore is just a fascinating example, a fascinating story. So the story of Singapore is basically that it was a British colony for a long time, all the way up until 1963, where it declared its independence and formed Malaysia with some other of these formerly British isles in the in that region of the Pacific. And so the United Malaysia ended up just kind of being problematic because it just culturally and politically didn't cohere as well as it wanted to. And so 2 years later, in 1965, Singapore seceded as its own independent nation. And so that's where Singapore gets its origin, is right around 1965. They've got here in this data, it's got the time period when it was a British colony also, but at that time in 1965, when it started, it was characterized by high unemployment. It had a ton of opium gangs. The opium trade was big. And so it was a big opium producer, and it was kind of gang driven, and there was widespread poverty. And so at the onset of this new nation, the new government, it was led by a man named Lee Kuan Yew, immediately saw that there needed to be some pretty significant economic reform. And so the focus of Lee Kuan Yew in this economic reform was entrepreneurship. That was the whole focus and center of Singapore's policy making at that time. So they ended up limiting taxes, limiting regulations, and actively promoting entrepreneurship, right? So this was something of a rarity, right? Where the government actually made entrepreneurship a top priority and actively facilitated it, which is super interesting. And so you can see the results almost immediately, basically immediately. They take off and skyrocket, even starting so far behind the US and the UK. They just caught up in just a few decades. Now, again, you can kind of see you can see this little, a couple of blips here again. For some reason in the 1990s, they saw that that growth was slowing down, and they're trying to figure this out. They had almost continuous, very vertical growth for a long time, and then it started to slow, and they got really concerned really quickly. You know, like, what's going on here? What can we do? And so again, they just doubled down on entrepreneurship. They launched entrepreneurship programs such as what they called Technopreneurship 21 and SME 21 programs to revitalize the entrepreneurial spirit. And they again lowered business taxes. They again reduced regulations. They provided incentives and invested more money into entrepreneurship. They developed startup support and guidance programs. And they even did some education reform to foster creative thinking and entrepreneurial spirit over the kind of the traditional rote memorization that is a lot of countries' education. And so you can see again, it just took off, and now Singapore's one of the top two. I'm not sure if they're top or number two richest countries in the world. So I hope that this is compelling evidence that the source of economic growth in the world is entrepreneurship. But let's try to dig into why. What is really going on here? Why is entrepreneurship so important? And let me start with some definitional stuff. What do we even mean by an economy? I ask my class this all the time. What is an economy? Have you ever asked someone this or thought about this? I even ask economists this, and you get They'll stew on it for a couple minutes because they don't know, right? You hear that term all the time, but there's not really a clear definition, right? What are we studying when we're studying economics? What is this economy? I get my students will eventually kind of proffer a couple of definitions, like the system of exchange, the system of trade, supply and demand, something like that. And that's part of it. That's kind of it. But the way I define an economy is this. An economy is the total well-being that we can make for ourselves given the scarce resources that we have. Does that make sense? So how well off are we? What is our quality of life? Isn't that the whole purpose of economics, of an economy? Isn't that the whole purpose of going to work, of consuming? We're trying to make ourselves as well off as we can. And how do we do that? Well, we've got to produce valuable things that make us better off. So we use our time as efficiently and effectively as possible, and the resources that we have available to create the things that make us the best off as we can. That's what an economy is. It's economizing, using our scarce resources economically to maximize how well off we are. And so what does it mean for an economy to grow? It just means we're finding a better way to make ourselves well off than we did before. We are now better off with those same resources available. Our standard of life is higher given those same scarce resources. We're using those scarce resources differently. We're using different resources maybe. We are changing the way we economize in a way that actually increases our total aggregate well-being. Does that make sense? One more question, definitional question here. What do we mean by value? Now, Per already talked about this a bit. What is economic value? This one's another one that is very confusing. When you think about it, you're like, I know what that word means, but how do you define it? Like, how do you put that into words? Value is an increase in our well-being, a benefit. It is, we were at a state of dissatisfaction, what Ludwig von Mises calls uneasiness, and value is a change in that state to a state of higher satisfaction, of a higher state of well-being. I am now better off. I am now happier. I am now more contented. I am more, there's a lot of different values that we have, but I am at a better state because I have consumed something. Something has changed in me that has increased my total well-being. And that change is value. So when we are pursuing economic value, when we are creating or facilitating economic value, what we're pursuing and facilitating is betterment. We're improving people's lives. And so what we mean by these first world countries that have a whole lot of economic value, it means as a society, our standard of life, our standard of living, our well-being is much better than these poorer countries that don't have that same quality of life. They don't have that same value. And if you look back in history and see what life was like 100 years ago, that was a tough life. We have it so good right now. And so, we're standing on the shoulders of our predecessors and building on the value that they created, and our lives are so much better for that. But I kind of laugh when people will say, like, the good old days back when we didn't have modern technology. No one really wants to go back there. that was a tougher life. We have our challenges brought on by modernity, by technology. Social media causes problems, but our lives are so much better. We are not in any sense threatened by starvation. We have so many comforts, right? This device right here is more advanced than the computers of just 20 years ago. Probably more recent than that. We can do so many things. We are so productive. We are so blessed, right? The poorest in our society have cell phones, have refrigeration, have cars, have air conditioning. We live in luxury. Even the poorest among us live in luxuries that just a couple of decades and centuries ago could never have imagined. So coming back to the topic at hand, what is entrepreneurship? This is the way I define it. And so this is published in an academic journal. Entrepreneurship is the intentional pursuit of new economic value. Again, how did we define value? Increase in well-being, this benefit, this moving from a state of lower living standards to a state of higher living standards. And entrepreneurship is trying to get there, right? So in general equilibrium theory, which is the kind of the prevailing view of economics, which I think is not a great way of thinking of the economy because it has no entrepreneur. We're basically in this stagnant state. What people want versus what we have, in this supply and demand connecting, right, into this state of equilibrium and the prices that are there. Where is the growth? Are we satisfied with what we have now? Are we just going to forevermore consume all the same things that we're consuming now? Turns out, no. We are looking all the time for new, better ways of doing things. How do we use our resources more effectively? Let's talk about this word scarce again. What do we mean by scarce? What does it mean for a resource to be scarce? Well, it means that not all resources can be used by all people at the same time. Right? We have a ton of resources, but if I'm going to use a particular resource, that means you can't. And I can't use that resource all the time. Especially certain resources are consumable. They are perishable. When I consume an apple, it's gone. No one else can use it. And I can't use it again. And so, some of our resources are more enduring, but they're still scarce. Everything, all of our resources are scarce. Our time, ourselves, and what we can do, right? If I am doing something right now, I am not doing something else. We call that an opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is where in my decision to do something, I have foregone, I have lost my ability to do something else or have something else. If I choose to one value opportunity, I can't do or have another value opportunity. That is lost to me. That is my opportunity cost. And so what entrepreneurship is this process of deciding what is the best use for my scarce resources. What's the best thing to do with those resources? How do I maximize my individual well-being given these are the resources I have to work with. I got to kind of do something with these resources. One of the things that we figured out back in the Enlightenment days, and again, that's the source of that the uptick, that change in the world, was we figured out by unleashing entrepreneurship with exchange, with free trade, I can make all these brilliant ideas and then share them, sell them to other people in exchange for what they have. And I can make the whole world better off. Not just myself, but the whole world better off with my idea. And that's entrepreneurship. So again, entrepreneurs, we're all entrepreneurs at times in our lives. We are trying to understand what makes us better off. So we're evolving in learning, what are my needs? What do I need? What are those needs, those dissatisfactions that are still unmet or could be better met? It turns out we don't really understand our needs very well. What we get when we're dissatisfied is this kind of sense of what Mises again called uneasiness. We get this sense of dissatisfaction. We get this sense, this feeling of not being well, but it's hard to necessarily pinpoint exactly what's causing that, right? And over time, we kind of figure those things out, right? When I've got this pain, this discomfort in my stomach, I pretty well understand that that's hunger pangs, and I know how to solve that. Of course, that doesn't mean I know exactly how to solve that the best. We're still learning about what's the best diet, the best tasting foods, and stuff like that. And so we're improving food over time, but I know how to satisfy my hunger pangs to some extent. I eat good food. But there's all kinds of other needs that we have that we don't understand nearly as well as we do hunger. Psychological needs. We understand a lot of physiological needs, but we're still developing, right? We're still dealing with, diseases and illness. And of course, we've got this pandemic going on that people still don't understand very well. And so we're dealing with these physiological needs. We're dealing with psychological needs. You can even say we're dealing with spiritual needs that we don't understand very well. And part of our human existence is trying to understand what we need, what makes us better, how to satisfy those needs. And part of that is we're doing science and discovery. We're experimenting and we're trying new technologies, and we're trying to develop these new technologies so that we can find better ways of solving our problems. So we've got increasing needs knowledge, learning what our needs are, and we've got increasing technical knowledge, technologies, and understanding resources, what they can do. And when we have both of those, an understanding of needs and understanding of technologies, we can intersect them. We can combine them into this aha moment, a solution. I can solve my problem, or I can solve their problem. That's entrepreneurship. Or at least that's the origins of entrepreneurship, right? So, entrepreneurship is solving the world's problems. I had this question here, that what problem can entrepreneurship not fix? And I was thinking about it. Think about it yourself for a second. Is there any problem in the world that entrepreneurship can't fix? You get a lot of the world's problems, and people immediately, instinctively turn to politicians to solve these problems, right? If we didn't have government, who would build the roads? Or what if someone attacks and we don't have a military or something like that, right? And those are interesting questions. But I think it's presumptuous and probably always, in fact, wrong to say that entrepreneurship couldn't fix it. In fact, In the entrepreneurship literature, in academia, we define the opportunity, the entrepreneurial opportunity, as a market imperfection. If there is a problem in a market, an inefficiency in the market, that's an opportunity. An entrepreneur finds that imperfection, sees it, and comes up with a solution to it. That entrepreneur can fix the world's problem for a profit. By making the world better, they get in exchange profit. They make themselves better by making other people better. That's the beauty of exchange, right? If I come to you with a solution to your problem, you're not going to pay for it unless it makes you better off than what you're giving up for it, right? You're paying me something to fix your problem because that solution is making you better than that money is. You know, what else could you do with that money? That's your opportunity cost. What you're choosing, at least you see it as, or you expect it to be better than that opportunity cost. And that's why you're paying me for it. I am making your life better. You see problems in the world like gender inequality, right? Have you heard of the gender pay gap? Now, there's actually some interesting research that suggests that gender pay gap is not controlling for a lot of factors, like that men and women actually make different choices, and that explains a lot of that. But let's accept for this thought experiment here that there is a significant gender pay gap, which there might be. Entrepreneurship can solve that, can it? If I'm an entrepreneur and I see all these brilliant women getting underpaid, I come along and say, hey, I'll pay you what you're worth. I get all these brilliant women to my company. They're getting paid what they're worth, and I get the best employees as a result. So this market inefficiency that we see is an entrepreneurial opportunity. I can make better profits by solving these problems. Is there a problem that entrepreneurship can't fix? I don't think so. Entrepreneurship is solving all the world's problems. Climate change, can entrepreneurship solve climate change? That one's hard to know, but I don't think we should count that out. Back to that original chart. The original reason for this chart was a paper that Per and I published a few years ago on inequality. What causes inequality? Well, you see this group of countries at the top of this screen, and then you see this group of countries at the bottom. And this has been labeled the Great Divergence. What is happening here? Why are these countries leaving these other countries behind? Why are these poor countries staying poor? And there's a lot of arguments in sociology. Sociologists have basically argued that there's this oppressive mechanism. These countries are oppressing, they are stealing from, they are keeping these other countries poor for their own benefit. No, that argument only comes about because you don't understand entrepreneurship. Again, that growth happens because of entrepreneurship. We escaped poverty because we innovated. We became entrepreneurs to find and generate better solutions, increase our well-being. And that is what we mean by economic growth. Hong Kong, US, Singapore at the top. We are making ourselves the best quality of life with our resources than these other countries are. That doesn't mean we have better resources. In fact, Per mentioned that, from Hong Kong doesn't really have anything. They don't have resources. They have, very limited physical, actual resources. So that as an explanation doesn't hold water. Hong Kong has made itself wealthy because of entrepreneurship, innovation. We are coming up with solutions. Those solutions don't require that we have specific large foundries of resources. We can procure those resources from other countries if we need to. That's fine. That's why trade is so awesome. But it's really about solving the world's problems. So this great divergence, what causes inequality? Well, it's entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the primary source of inequality. We've done some data testing on this, and that's the number one reason, right? So there's some other explanations. Thomas Piketty came out with a book a few years ago. The thesis of that book was that the interest rate, return on capital, is higher than the rate of economic growth, R minus G. And so the wealthy that are gaining on their interest are actually increasing their wealth faster than people that are that are working their way up the ladder. That has a very small effect. It does have an effect, but it's very small. Compared to the explanation of entrepreneurship, we compared them, the magnitude, there was no comparison. Entrepreneurship explained almost all of it. So, is that a problem? Entrepreneurship causing inequality, is that a problem? Well, no, not really. I mean, the alternative is no entrepreneurship, which means no growth. So we've got this tension. We've got entrepreneurship causing growth and causing inequality. If we want no inequality, we have to sacrifice growth. So that's a pretty severe trade-off. But what does happen with entrepreneurship also is that the diffusion of wealth. Have you ever heard that rising tide lifts all boats quote? There's a lot of criticisms of that, but in essence, it's fairly correct. It's just they don't lift all boats at the same rate. When inequality happens due to entrepreneurship, the wealthy or the entrepreneurs that are successful get extremely wealthy. And the poor also get wealthier, just not as fast, not as wealthy as obviously the successful entrepreneur. Because the entrepreneur is making the poor's lives better by coming up with a solution to their problems. And the more people they can satisfy, the more people they can create wealth for, the wealthier the entrepreneur becomes. And so, do you begrudge Jeff Bezos or, Steve Jobs and all these other super wealthy entrepreneurs their wealth? A lot of people do. But how did they get that wealth? By making the world a better place. But what's interesting about this is there's actually two kind of types of entrepreneurship. There's this innovative entrepreneurship where you're creating a new solution. And then there's this imitative, competitive entrepreneurship where you're copying someone else's idea and competing with them. So you're getting into the same industry and you're just saying, well, I can do that too and do it maybe better. And so you get entrepreneurs that are creating brand new industries and markets, and then you got competitors, imitators coming in to compete. And this two-sided process creates new value and then diffuses that value out to the rest of the market, right? So whenever there's a brand new technology, let's go with the smartphones again, right? So when you got this brand new smartphone technology, who can afford it? It's usually, the very wealthy or those that need it the most, right? I didn't get a smartphone until, I don't know, 2008 or something like that. But smartphone technology was there around. BlackBerry, Microsoft, they had smartphones almost a decade earlier. But then what happened? Apple came in with the iPhone. Nokia, Nokia didn't ever really get into smartphones, but Samsung, LG, Motorola, they all came in with competitive products. Some of them a lot cheaper than the BlackBerry and the iPhone. And they competed in this market for different customers. And that made the smartphone technology, one, that much better, and two, available for everyone. You look at the growth of smartphone adoption in third world countries, in Africa and India, it is skyrocketing. And that's a beautiful thing. That is entrepreneurship. So you are increasing inequality, yes, but you are then making the world more equal and making those that are poorest off so much better off. That's the beauty of entrepreneurship. So what causes entrepreneurship? Nothing causes entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is a choice. Entrepreneurship is a journey you choose to take or not. There are things that facilitate, enable entrepreneurship. In entrepreneurship science, so many scholars are trying to figure out what causes entrepreneurship, but they're coming at it from the wrong angle. They're looking at it differently. They're like, what's the genetic components of an entrepreneur that's different from everyone else? Nothing really. They haven't found any of these reasons. Personality, genetics, any of this, there's not really a real difference between entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs. It's just who chooses entrepreneurship and who doesn't. Who has the courage to take this journey? Who sees entrepreneurship as the best path to their goals? You can be an entrepreneur. You just have to decide that's what you want to do. Entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It's not an easy journey. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress. There's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of ventures fail. I think we've come to fear failure far more than we need to. Entrepreneurs that fail are not, they're not losing their whole lives. They are not out of life. They're not out of society, right? They're not kicked out of anything, right? They are still here. And most of them try again. And in fact, most successful entrepreneurs fail first. And the second time, the third time, is when they really succeed and make it big. So don't fear failure. It is okay to fail. In fact, if you're going to fail, fail quickly. Don't wait to fail. A lot of entrepreneurs have a losing strategy, a losing idea, or a losing implementation, but they want to hold on to it and see if they can make it work because they invested so much into this. This is the sunk cost fallacy. Have you heard of the sunk cost fallacy? This is one of our cognitive biases where we just, once we kind of make it ours, and it's our own, we kind of feel this responsibility for it and we don't want to lose it. Entrepreneurs do that all the time. Feel free to fail. and don't hold on to it so tightly, your first venture, that it causes you to lose more than you need to. It's okay to use that as a learning platform for your next idea. But again, entrepreneurship is not caused, but it is facilitated, it is enabled by freedom, economic freedom in particular, and courage. So that's where you see that divergence. Coming back to this previous slide, those countries at the top of that graph have the most economic freedom and a culture of entrepreneurial courage. So, to wrap up, entrepreneurship is so important for an economy and for the world. Entrepreneurship is the source of changing the world. Do you want to change the world? I don't know, this isn't necessarily a pep talk to become entrepreneurs. Not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur. Some of you will work for entrepreneurs instead, and that's fine. But it's the entrepreneurs that are changing the world. And if that is what you want to do, entrepreneurship is the best way. I am a little early on my time, but I think I'll just take comments at this point. So I think I'm done with my presentation. So, you guys have any comments or questions? Yeah, James, Professor Yohe.
Sorry, it took me a while to unmute there. There we go. I thought that what you said about failing was very important. And I'm sure you know more about it than I, but there are tons of studies out there. I mean, most entrepreneurs aren't getting it done on their first try, are they? Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I was was that a finished thought?
Yeah, I'm just kind of asking a question. Maybe you knew more about of course you know more about.
Oh yeah, I mean that is kind of the general consensus. There's a couple of ways you can get into entrepreneurship successfully on your first try. One is if you kind of grew up in an entrepreneurial household where your parents are entrepreneurs, or if you have a very close mentor that can kind of talk you and help you through the process. That leads to more first-time successes. And two, you tend to be more successful on your first try if you do what's called a hybrid approach, where you're starting your entrepreneurial venture as a side hustle. And so you've got your employment job, and then you're doing your side hustle on the side. And once that side hustle kind of starts to get momentum, then you can step out of your employment job and take on your venture full time, right? And so that actually ends up being quite a successful strategy. So if you're a little bit afraid of getting started, that might be an approach for you where you can kind of keep your day job and build your side hustle on the side until it gets large enough for you to kind of take that on full time. So those are a couple of approaches. But as you said, Professor Yohe, if you do fail, that's fine. I mean, most entrepreneurs you don't have to invest very much. I mean, you're investing your time, you're investing some of your resources, but I suggest that you don't commit more resources than you're willing to lose. Don't commit your life savings, don't commit, there are so many ideas that you can get started with very few resources. I started a consulting business last year I think we've put in like a couple $100 into it. That's it. So you can find needs, consumers' needs that don't require an upfront commitment. And if it does require an upfront commitment of resources, if you are a good entrepreneur, if you have a good idea, if you're good at selling it and explaining it, people will give you money to pursue that idea, right? There is investment dollars. And if it's hard to get investment dollars, maybe that's the market telling you maybe not that good of an idea. But you will need to hustle. You will need to be putting your heart and soul into it to succeed, but it doesn't need to risk your whole life savings or anything like that. So those are a few suggestions, I guess.
Thank you. Oh, and if you have questions, go to reactions, and you can see where it says raise your hand. We got a Per Bylund.
Yeah, Parker. If you're talking, I can't hear you.
Parker, you're unmuted. Go ahead and talk.
No, he says his mic isn't working. Feel free to type your question into the chat if you want. So Parker's question is, what have the Chinese done different since the Great Leap? There's a couple of really interesting books on that. There's one by Ronald Coase and another co-author, Chinese co-author, I don't remember his name, on how, on basically that question, how China has gone entrepreneurial. I think Coase and his co-author call it going capitalist, but it's really going entrepreneurial. So basically they've taken the central planning aspect of it, of their approach to economics away. And they basically said, okay, you people who are running these businesses, you understand what you're doing better than we do, we central planners. And so you do it, we're just going to leave you alone, let you do your thing, but you need to be, meeting these goals and stuff like that. Turns out that was a much better approach, right? So if maybe you've heard of the economist Friedrich Hayek, but Hayek explained that economic knowledge is dispersed, right? We all have different information and knowledge and understanding of different pieces of the economy. First, we understand our own needs differently and better than anyone else. And two, we have local knowledge of what's going on in the local markets, the local preferences, the local trends and supplies and resources and what people are good at and skills and stuff like that. And so what Hayek argued was that because knowledge is dispersed, central planning can't really work. It's extremely inefficient because you've got one person making decisions for all these people that have different preferences and different needs and different abilities, and you're destined to use those extremely inefficiently. And so the better way is to just let them do it themselves. If you have knowledge, how can you use that knowledge more effectively? How can you use what knowledge you have entrepreneurially to make your life better by making other people's lives better? And turns out that works a whole lot better. So China has moved in that direction, but they are very reluctant to go full free markets. And that's why I don't expect them to have astronomical growth, but at least it has become much better for the Chinese, which is great. That's a good question. Other questions? I got Nathan first and then Jordan.
Would you recommend going through the VA for a small business loan or a private investor?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on what the terms are of the investment. I mean, if you're going to get investment, sometimes those investments come with strings. They sometimes come with activist investors that want a say in what you do, which can be good if they know what they're doing, if they are good mentors, but oftentimes can be really bad. They put regulations, restrictions, which makes it hard for you to adapt and adjust to new knowledge and information and changing market conditions, right? So entrepreneurs have to be, what we use the term agile, but they have to be adaptive. They have to be willing to change quickly to the market conditions and what new information they have, because most of the times our assumptions about what people really want turn out to be wrong. And so we have to learn and change really quickly and cut our losses as fast as possible as we can. And so if your investors are slowing your agility, your ability to adapt, then that's a problem. So whether the VA comes with strings or not, I suspect they do. That could end up becoming a problem. So there is a kind of a marriage between an investor and entrepreneur where you want good investors that believe in what you're doing and believe in you and trust you to do what's right, and are not going to step on your toes and keep you from doing what needs to be done. I hope that answers your question. Jordan?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I have two questions, one that follows up the first one. So my question is, you mentioned that there was a significant gap in equality between countries due to the amount of entrepreneurship. And you also mentioned that there's a notable amount of inequality between genders in countries with a lot of entrepreneurship. Like there's a possibility of it. Do you think that striving for equality between everyone could be bad or cause breakdowns in the long run for entrepreneurship?
It's a good question. Yeah. It depends on what you mean by equality. If you want equality of outcomes, if you want everyone to have the same stuff, the same results, that's going to be a problem because we're all different. We have different desires. We have different needs. We have different skills and abilities. And because of that, if you let entrepreneurship flourish, it is naturally going to result in different outcomes. So if that's what if you're going for equality of the outcome, then you can only get there by either restricting what people can do and basically telling different people you can only do, you can't do this or that, or else redistributing at the end. Once some people are successful, you redistribute their successes to others. And that ends up with a disincentivizing effect also that's pretty severe, right? If you don't get to gain from your successes, then you're less likely to end up even trying or doing that, right? That extra effort isn't beneficial to you, and so you are disincentivized from doing it. So the result is a severe hampering of entrepreneurship in practice. And so, yes, trying to create equality ends up hampering entrepreneurship and stagnating growth is what the literature shows. If you're talking about kind of a equality on the forefront of that, kind of the equality of the law or something like that. Some people say equality of opportunity. I don't think that's quite right because, everybody's in a different circumstance. So you can't have perfect equality of opportunity, right? If I am less skilled than Mario, then we can't have the same equality of opportunity. He's got a better opportunity than me because he has better skills than me. And so, again, but what people really mean by that is equality of kind of the law and the kind of restrictions and stuff. I think that tends to facilitate entrepreneurship more than hamper it. So I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but
Yeah, that answered it.
yeah, it's a good
Thank
question.
you. And then my follow-up question was, in comparison to ideologies that countries follow, like for instance, America has capitalism and like China has communism. Do you think that capitalism is the best ideology for entrepreneurship? Or do you think that in the future, a new ideology could come out or could come about that could cause like more equality for people, but still keep the integrity of true entrepreneurship without breaking it down? And
Yeah. I am not super political. In fact, you might describe me as anti-political. I hate politics. But in terms of economic systems, I don't usually love the term capitalism because what people mean by capitalism is different from different sides. From on the right, people in favor of capitalism, what they call capitalism is really what is economic freedom is what they mean. And on people on the left, when they refer to capitalism, they're talking about cronyism, right? So capitalists kind of get to game the system in their favor, and so the wealthy end up buying off politicians, and it causes these protectionist barriers to entry and inhibits entrepreneurship. So what people mean by capitalism per se is different things, and that's causing us to kind of talk past each other. But as far as economic policy goes, it's pretty dang clear that the freer the economy, the faster it grows. It is completely linear. So if you look at the linear, you look at the correlation, it's just almost a one-to-one correlation, right? This more freedom equals more growth. Of course, more growth means more inequality temporarily, but if you actually look at it, and this is kind of what our study a couple of years ago with Per was saying, is that inequality is kind of a temporary inequality, but it keeps getting exacerbated by entrepreneurship. So it gets exacerbated by entrepreneurship, and then entrepreneurship mitigates it by competing away those profits, and then it gets exacerbated. And so we're in a kind of a period of such rapid innovation that the inequality grows faster than it is being diffused than it being mitigated by imitative entrepreneurship, because there's more innovations happening, more disruptive innovations happening. And so is that a bad thing? I don't think so, because it's I don't mind Jeff Bezos being rich, because I just love Amazon services. Jeff Bezos has made my life better. And so, the disparity itself, a lot of people get frustrated with that. But when we flip our understanding and see it as they are rich because they have made that many people's lives better, it becomes a lot more tenable. And that's where I'm at personally. But not everybody sees justice the same way. So I don't know if that answers your question. I'm kind of skirting, basically taking a specific political position. But I do think whatever the political system, economic freedom is best for everyone, even the poor. You look at our poor and compare them to the poor of, say, China, and there's no comparison. Our poor are so much better off. You do not want to be poor in China.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alina, is that how you pronounce it? Elena?
Yes. Okay, so say you have a product on the market that fails, and you said it's better to fail quickly rather than dragging it out.
Mhm.
Would you say it's worth trying the same product again, or should you just scrap the whole idea?
Yeah, that's a tough one because if you're going to try the same product again, it's going to have to kind of be totally rebranded, and that's going to be tough. So yeah, I think generally the accepted wisdom is that you pivot, do something different. But if it's a good idea and you just did it wrong, you might keep that idea strung along and come back to it a little bit later. It is possible to rebrand to kind of like start over again, but it's pretty tricky because you have to basically, I don't know, start with different customers and stuff like that. Yeah, so if you're asking me directly, what would I recommend? I'd say at least go at least one business away in separation. So do something else first before you go back to it. But it is possible to rebrand, to relaunch. It's just really tricky because you've got a branding issue already. Does that make sense? I can elaborate if it wasn't clear enough.
It makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Mark, excuse me, I'm sorry, Professor Packard, thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to interrupt. I think that was all the questions, wasn't it?
I didn't see any other hands.
Okay. Yeah, our next speaker needs to get on. He's got something to do afterwards. First off, I want to thank you very, very much. I appreciate all that you've done. Again, the honorarium wasn't large enough, but maybe next time we'll get something more than 7 figures out there for you. Which is could be 8. We could just make this one 8, just 8 of the same digit. Unfortunately,
You've been a great audience. I appreciate your attention, and thanks for the invite, James.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Our next speaker is from here at Gadsden State. His name is Mr. Mario Gallardo. He is my brain is going on me. Excuse me. The department chair for our art division. He is also a local entrepreneur and has some interesting projects that he's working on to help other entrepreneurs. I was going to go with a 5-minute break, but I think we'll just go straight into it. Mr. Gallardo, are you on?
Yes, I'm on.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Mark, if you could transfer the host back to me, that would be great. And I'll transfer it to Mr. Gallardo. Thank you so much. And Mario, I'm transferring that over to you right now. Go ahead. You should be able to post your screen now.
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Yohe, for inviting me to participate in this. Had I known I was going to follow 2 fellows with a PhD in entrepreneurship, I might have thought twice about it. So I'm going to be talking about entrepreneurship, but not really from an academic point of view or even from a point of theory, but from my own experiences. And I'm going to be talking to you about basically 3 areas of entrepreneurship that I have been involved in, I guess you could say, over the last 10 years. One would be arts and cultural entrepreneurship, and you could also lump in education there with that. And the other being small business entrepreneurship. And then finally, the final project that I'm going to talk about is specifically a community development project with a focus on workforce development and entrepreneurship. So I'm going to talk about those areas. So you can see my titles, some of my titles there on the screen. I'm a full-time instructor at Gadsden State. I'm also the chair of fine arts here. So I oversee the visual arts department, the music department, theater department, and the Wallace Hall Fine Arts Center. Outside of the college, I'm the executive director of the Walnut Gallery. I'm going to be talking to you about that. And my wife and I own Al's Hollow Farm. I'll be sharing some of that with you. And then I'm also the founder, and I guess you could say co-founder, because I have a business partner of Town Creek Village. And that's going to be the final project that we talk about. The previous presenter mentioned side hustles. I think I'm really a believer in side hustles. I think that's really the majority of what I do, I guess you could call, would be a side hustle. So I'm going to be talking about things that I'm passionate about. Some of the things that have been said already are things that I'm going to be bringing up, that entrepreneurship requires a certain amount of courage and willingness to step out and take risks. A lot of the things that I've been involved with seemed kind of crazy at the time, both to me and to other people, so you have to be willing to push past those initial fears when you have a vision, and you have to be willing to put in the work and sort of see that happen. So the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is a project, which is really a community arts project, the Walnut Gallery. It's a 501c3 organization that promotes contemporary art in Gadsden. It started in 2007. A friend of mine was looking for an apartment, and we stumbled on to this beautiful upstairs space, and it didn't really suit his needs for an apartment, but we were just wowed by the space and thought, wow, this could be a really cool art space. And so I accidentally sort of came upon the idea of starting the Walnut Gallery. It had been something sort of ruminating with me for a while, not to speak ill of any other sort of cultural art institutions, but for me personally, I didn't see the kind of contemporary art exhibitions happening. I didn't see the kind of community projects that I wanted to be involved with. And through the Walnut Gallery, I was able to work with other people and form partnerships to sort of make the environment that I wanted to experience, to sort of be involved in creating the artistic and cultural experiences. So on the screen, you can see an image by an artist using hornet's nest pressed into a mold to create the human form. I'm going to go through some of these really fast, just show you images of the gallery. This is an art installation made from corrugated plastic, so the same material that would be used in a yard sign. So our first location was in what was called the Oddfellows Hall, which was an upstairs sort of open space that we converted into an art gallery. So along with the exhibitions, one of the things that I'm really proud of is that the Walnut Gallery brings different art forms together. So here you can see the Downtown Dance Conservatory doing a responsive, or you could say an interpretive dance around the installation. We also promote literacy, and so we have poetry readings and film screenings. And so it's really a coming together of a lot of different art forms. This is a multimedia installation, so projected video, traditional paintings, photography. Openings are really a great moment. It's a moment where people from all parts of the community come out, and there's common ground. The arts, for me, is a way to form connection and community. Whether it's music or theater or visual arts, I think we can all understand it with art, with music. There's something about that transcends, political ideas or cultural differences. There's a rhythm that we can all connect to, and the arts have that way of connecting us and building the community. So sort of the driving factor beyond what I'm doing through the Walnut Gallery is to create community. And when we have art openings and people come together, it's really a special moment for me, especially for a large majority of the people who come to the openings who have really never been to an art experience or an art opening. Many of the people who come are students of mine in art appreciation courses. And so it brings the subject matter to life. It takes it from a textbook theory to this experiential learning process. So I'll speed through some of these images. This is an image of a show from the University of Alabama, a sculpture show in 2011. If you remember, the tornado hit Tuscaloosa at that time. One of the exhibiting artists in this show was actually killed by the tornado. And her professor at the University of Alabama, Craig Weatherspoon, was able to dig through the rubble of her apartment and found the remnants of the last sculpture that she was working on. It was in wax form, and it was believed to have been lost. He found that wax form and took it to Sloss Furnace, and they were able to turn that wax into a tangible cast iron sculpture. And when the exhibition closed, we partnered with the University of Alabama, and they sent their dean of arts and had a ceremony in Morgan's memory. So Morgan Siegler was the artist, and in this image you can see her mother and her father here, and we were able to present them with this sculpture, which is really sort of the last thing that their daughter created. You can see her classmates and the professor there. I show this because it's really an example of the power of art to transcend beyond just sort of aesthetic concerns. It's not just about, pretty pictures. It can be a very powerful thing. It can heal. It can bring people together. In this case, it was a really poignant moment, and I'm so glad to have been a part of it. So the Walnut Gallery started on a dime. It started with me and a friend of mine, a colleague, and we formed a nonprofit. Neither of us had any money to make it happen, but we had a vision, and we knew that we wanted to promote the arts, and we knew that we could bring a certain vitality that the community would respond to. And so through partnerships and through teams that were put together, we've really been successful. And one of those partners has been the Mary G. Hardin Center for Cultural Arts. They have allowed us to put on numerous exhibitions in their venue. So here's an exhibition by a Chinese artist named Meijun Zhang. And through this partnership, not only with the Center for Cultural Arts, but with the Holiday Inn Express and Gadsden State, we were able to bring Meijun to Gadsden for several weeks. And she was on campus at Gadsden State and talked with students and was in the community doing workshops. And it was really just a wonderful cultural exchange. Here you can see she was making small animal sculptures from cake flour and dough. So we've done a number of workshops. Here's a workshop with the artist Doug Balas. He's doing a bookmaking workshop. So it's really a special moment. The same way I talked about how the openings are these moments where people come together and there's this connection and community, and the workshops are the same way. You have people who are passionate about learning and being able to come together with people who have the similar passions. It's really just a great moment. So here's another show in the Cultural Arts Center. This is sort of a partnership between the arts and industry. This was a show that involved a partnership with Goodyear, where they allowed me to come into the space and get materials that were normally used for tires to put on this exhibition at the Mary G. Hardin Center for Cultural Arts. And so it's a sort of surreal, dreamlike state. These are the figures that you see floating there are cast from made in tape of actual retired Goodyear workers, and then all the sort of rubber and material that's used. Another installation at the Mary G. Hardin Center where this sort of mud wall was erected and water slowly dripped down and caused it to come down to the bottom. So I'm going to move through these kind of quickly. If you want to see a lot more images and sort of get a feel for what's going on at the Walnut Gallery, if you go to our Facebook page, the Walnut Gallery, you can scroll through just hundreds of images and really get a sense of all of the things that are happening. So this is an exhibition. I mentioned Craig Weatherspoon being the sculpture professor at University of Alabama. This is a show that he put on in the Mary G. Hardin Center for the Walnut Gallery. And the sculpture that you see on the left was one that was actually picked up by the tornado and taken several miles down the road and sort of ripped apart and torn apart. This series of work led to some outdoor sculptures that were installed at the Birmingham Museum of Art, and we actually have one of his pieces in downtown Gadsden now, so we'll be seeing those. This is Craig's work. Again, bringing different art forms together. Downtown Dance has been great to sort of respond to exhibitions. So I mentioned that one of the things that we do at the Walnut Gallery is not only promote contemporary art at the gallery, but we're actively involved in promoting public sculpture. So if you drive through downtown Gadsden, you'll see sculptures up and down Broad Street. If you drive to some of the surrounding neighborhoods, you'll see sculptures installed. We have actually a grant that we're working on right now from the Alabama State Council on the Arts to bring in 10 more public sculptures. And there are a number of people in the community who are also interested in this, and including the Gadsden Museum of Art and its director, Ray Wetzel, who's been heading up a mural project that's also sort of increasing public access and the arts. This is a sculpture by Dee Dee Morrison. So all of these pieces were originally supposed to be installed for 2 years. This one's permanently installed now at no cost to the city. This was in Alabama City. This one is installed at the Gadsden Public Library. This is a permanent installation. Here you can see a sculpture being installed at the Carver Center. This is a permanent installation. Here's the sculpture by Craig Weatherspoon. This is him bolting it down to the concrete. When this was first installed, this was one of the first sculptures that was installed, and it was a shock. It was a sort of an aesthetic shock to people to see it. And there was actually a letter, or maybe not a letter, I think it was on Facebook, that someone went in this long rant about how it wasn't a opprobrious sculpture and it was a public outrage. But over time, I think people have sort of grown to love it. It's sort of like, the Eiffel Tower, when it was first put up, it was a shock and surprise, but now it's something that, the city of Paris cherishes. I think that these public art pieces that are going up all over Gadsden have been accepted, and there's a sort of change in the mentality for the city. It certainly is exciting during First Friday. You can see kids climbing on it and inside it. Another project that the Walnut Gallery was involved in, this was several years back, was the Million Bones Project, where we partnered with area schools and the students created handmade bones from plaster. And this was a larger project. The Million Bones Project is a nationwide project where the artist organizer wanted to bring attention to genocide. And so they encouraged communities to create these works and to talk about genocide, and then gave the opportunity to take those to Washington, D.C. and put them on the mall. So you can see we're part of a grand installation. So a team of us went to Washington, D.C. and put about 10,000 bones on the mall. I mentioned that we also sponsor literacy. So we have an ongoing poetry series, and we try to have a series that relates to the exhibitions that are on display. And this is a partnership with several educators and local poets. You can see Dave Murdoch there. He teaches English at Gadsden State Community College. Bill Thornton and Tabitha Bozeman. but it's open to the community. And so the community is involved in the readings. It's really a great moment. Another thing that we're really proud of at the Walnut Gallery is outreach education. So linked with the poetry series, we've done multiple poetry workshops and outreach educational activities. This is one at the Gadsden Public Library. This is Irene Latham. So she worked with children to develop poetry, and then they read these to each other. This is Alabama Poet Laureate Susan Walker. She came and did a reading and ended the night. It was just a really beautiful poem. If you go to our website, you can see the video of it where she sings this sort of love song about her and her husband, and it's really great. So this is Dave Murdoch and Sue. So just to go through some exhibitions quickly, this is the Mug Extravaganza and some related imagery. We had a coffee barista, a sort of local entrepreneur, set up and sell coffee for this event. Some of the programming that we do also is a way to promote the arts, the craft that's made in Alabama. So it's not just contemporary art. The G's Band quilts is an art form that's really, it's craft, but it's become recognized worldwide almost as contemporary art. So we traveled to G's Bend, met the quilters through a connection that we had here in Gadsden. Nanda Patel, who owns the Holiday Inn Express, she put us in touch with them, and we traveled down and got to know them, got to pick out quilts and brought those back to the Walnut Gallery. And they actually came and they were part of a gala event and talked to us about their work and sang to the people in attendance. And then after the event, the next 2 days, they put on a workshop for the community to participate. So we also do film screenings. This was one that I'm really proud of. This was a film screening of Concrete, Steel, and Paint by Cindy Burstein. And this film was about how the arts could bring people together and bring about reconciliation. It was a film about how the victims of crimes and the perpetrators of those crimes worked on artworks together. And so when we screened this film, we screened it at the Pittman Theater in Gadsden, and we invited the Etowah County Sheriff's Department to bring inmates to watch the film along with the public. And they came and they participated in, watching the film and in the question and answer series at the end. And it was really a great moment. So I'll fly through this. I don't want to spend too much time on the Walnut Gallery, but you can see in some of these images just the sort of shared joy and sort of excitement of experiencing the arts. Oktoberfest is one of the partnerships that we have that both promotes the art and local business. This is with the Back 40 Brewery, where we come into the brewery, set up art displays, have live music, and people get to enjoy the beverage of their choice and eat foods that relate to Oktoberfest. So in 2013, we lost the lease in our space in the Oddfellows Hall, and we needed a new venue. And after looking around really only about a block down the road, we found a former church that had been sitting and abandoned. And we were able to purchase this church, and we immediately put a new roof on it and started to renovate the interior. You can see my daughter there holding out an offering plate there. So you can see what the interior was like with the pews, the red carpet. And so what we did was we immediately gave the pews to the city. And so they have that in a courthouse. They have those in a courthouse now. And then we put up walls in the space, and we converted it into an art gallery. So this is what it looks like now. In the back, we have also converted that space for an artist in residence apartment. So an artist can live and work at the space and provide outreach education. Here you can see some exhibitions in that space. And again, it's just, if you look at this image, just the cross section of people. I just really love seeing community come together. So some of our shows are more traditional, and some push the bounds of what art is and what people consider art to be. This was a show called Flat Granny, and it was a performance artwork that really just transformed the gallery. So if you remember that image that we saw of the shiny gallery, this was the first show that came in right after that, where we literally had pine trees, mounted into the building and all sorts of debris everywhere, but it totally transformed the space. It was a really great first show to open the gallery with. I'm going to move through these kind of fast now so we can get past this to my next ones. This is Nanda Patel. I do want to mention her specifically because when we started our first gallery space, she was a patron. She rented a small space and made the artwork that you see in this show that's in the gallery. She made this as sort of a student of the Walnut Gallery, but she's also been a great patron and supporter. So all sorts of different visual artworks. Here's a couple of images of the outreach education that we really got started in 2019. I mentioned that we had the renovated space in the back of the gallery. And through 2019, we had Parker Hunt, a ceramic artist, and he lived in the back with his wife and dog, and then had a studio at Gadsden State. And so he was here in our art department and did community continuing education classes here. But also went into every area middle school and elementary school and high school and even in other counties and did ceramics demonstrations. And this is at Donahue Elementary. This is the elementary school that I went to, where the entire elementary school was able to come and watch this presentation. It's really great to see these moments. So how does something like that happen? How do we bring all of these people together? How do we create these public art projects and exhibitions? It happens through partnerships and teams. And the thing that I would say in terms of contributing to our discussion about entrepreneurship is that you need to find the right partners, and you need to learn how to collaborate, and you need to be able to share a vision. And it's impossible to do by yourself, and you have to realize that. And one of the things I'm proud of the work about the Walnut Gallery is that it's a group of people who are united for a common vision to transform the city. And I believe that the arts can do that. And if you look at Chattanooga, for example, not too many years ago, it was sort of a rundown industrial city, but they've used the arts and culture to totally revitalize that area. And that's sort of my vision for Gadsden, is to use the arts as a way to promote economic development along with the benefits of the cultural development. All right, so that was the Walnut Gallery. I'm also a co-owner. My wife is really the driving force for Al's Hollow Farm, but we are a family-owned farm. You can find us online on Facebook, and you can find us through our website, alshollowfarm.com. We are located in North Gadsden, and it's a hydroponic farm. So in 2016, my wife, and several years before that, my wife and children were really involved in the community gardens in our neighborhood. And it just really sparked an interest to look for land to maybe start a farm of our own. And one day we were driving around in North Gadsden where we knew that some land was for sale, And we asked the person next to the property about it. And he said, well, if you want to, start a farm, why don't you buy mine? I'm about to retire. And we just sort of looked at each other and thought, wow, this is crazy. But we jumped in. We didn't know how in the world we were going to do it, and we didn't have the money to buy a farm. We lived in a 100-year-old house downtown that was in need of renovation before we sold it. So we went ahead and said, yes, we'll do it. But the only way we're going to do it is if you bring us in, train us how to run the farm, show us, what's going on. And so for about 2 years, I worked on renovating the house, getting it ready to sell. And Lisa and the kids went to the farm every day and learned how to work it. We took it over in 2018, and it's been successful for us as a family farm. It's continuously growing. You can see our sales there for a small farm, a family farm. That's not bad. From 2018 to 2020, it's over $1 million in sales, and we're projecting that by the end of this year we'll have about $500,000 in sales. So it's really just been a wild ride, for the last few years. I grew up in Gadsden primarily, which I know anyone who comes from a big city, hearing someone say, well, I lived in the city, in Gadsden, Alabama, is sort of a laugh. But I was used to being very close to everything and everything really, just at a moment's notice away. But living out in the country is just a little bit different. So I'm getting used to it. But I'm really proud of my wife and family and all of the effort that they've put into making this farm successful. So I don't know if you know what hydroponics is, but it's primarily we grow lettuces, floating them in a nutrient solution. So when you're starting a business, it doesn't hurt at all to have some good PR. Here's my wife, Lisa, on the cover of the Gadsden Style magazine. They came and did a whole story about, our family and the transition that we were making. So there was a lot of good, I would say, a good sort of warm vibes in the community about the farm and us taking it over. Here you can see my family and our dogs. We've added a number of dogs and animals since this photo. So what do I get to do at the farm? Well, I get to do what I love best, and that's to cook with the wonderful produce, to create beautiful plates. I get to do the marketing and assist with that sort of side of the farm. Obviously, I'm very involved in what I do at the college and in the community. And so it's a team effort, but it's primarily my wife and children who are really making this work. Some pictures from the farm. So it's about a 60-acre farm, and most of the growing is done in a 20,000 square foot greenhouse facility. So this is heated and cooled so we can grow vegetables year round. When we took over the farm, it was really, I think, trying to be all things to all people, and was growing just about every vegetable you could imagine. And the only problem with that is that different vegetables require different heat. And to keep tomatoes growing in the summer, you have to really expend a lot of energy to keep the greenhouse warm. So what we're doing is we are trying to focus in on what we grow best, and that's a variety of greens, and those can stay at a much cooler temperature in the winter, and cooling the greenhouse is a lot easier than trying to heat it because we use water walls and fans to exhaust. So you can see some of our greens, different lettuces. You go through a laundry list of all of the greens that we sell. Probably the biggest moneymaker is the arugula. So they will cut off, 10 or 20 pounds of that every day to sell to local restaurants. And I'm probably underestimating that quite a bit. But they sell our products in markets, including the Pepper Place Market in Birmingham. This is the largest market in Alabama, and the Fifth Street Market in Gadsden. And to a number of grocery stores. We are in all of the Johnson stores, which are in Gadsden and Atala and Jacksonville and the surrounding communities, and then a number of Piggly Wiggly stores in Birmingham. We also supply local restaurants. This is a beautiful rainbow. This is really not only supplying a restaurant, but also a partnership. So Beautiful Rainbow is a program that is a partnership between the Gadsden City Schools and the Gadsden Library, where they have a restaurant, and the people who run the restaurant are students with cognitive disabilities. And it's really just an amazing program that's taken off. It's something that I encourage you to look up to find out more about. But we help them by getting starter plants ready for their garden, and we sell them a lot of the produce that they serve. We're in several restaurants in Gadsden. One of our biggest sellers of our salads is Blackstone Pub and Eatery. This is my favorite salad you can see on the screen, the Frankie B and the Hoff. So we're in all sorts of places. We're in that community programs restaurant, the pub, but we're also in higher end restaurants in Birmingham. For example, this is Hot and Hot it's Chris Hastings restaurant, and Chris Hastings is a award-winning chef, and he takes our arugula to the next level. You can see that here in this image where he's creating the soft shell crab BLT. So this past year, when the pandemic hit, it really shook us, for a little bit, trying to figure out what are we going to do, because a large part of the business is the Pepper Place Market. If you're not familiar with that, it is just a large market in Birmingham, and thousands of people come, and it can really make your year. And when the pandemic hit, it shut that down. And so we had to pivot really fast and figure out ways to get our produce to the public. And I'm really proud of Lisa for forming partnerships with local businesses, including the Back 40 Beer Company. Well, they allowed her to use their parking lot and the facility for people to drive through and pick up produce. She brought in other farms, and the really cool thing about it is that all of the produce was sold ahead of time online, and it's really been a way to know what we need to bring to market. So some markets, you'll load up produce and go to a market, and then you may not sell it all, but by having pre-orders like this, it really cut down on cost and allowed us to maximize profits. And last year was the best year that the farm's ever had. So I'm really proud of what Lisa and the farm has been able to do. All right, so I'm going to transition now to another project that I'm involved with. And this project grew out of a trip to New Orleans in 2019. I mentioned that I'm the chair of the Fine Arts Department. Well, the music department traveled to New Orleans to do music performances and to visit music sites. And we went to one place in the middle of the Ninth Ward, and it was the Ellis Marcellus Center. And this facility was instrumental and is instrumental in a transformation of that entire neighborhood and community where this fine arts facility was built. It became a haven for artists who moved into the community. The rundown houses around that facility were fixed up, and it became an affordable housing neighborhood for artists and musicians. And it's really a beautiful thing. If you've never heard anything about it or seen it, I would encourage you to look it up. It's the Ellis Marcellus Center. And it's created just a renaissance and revitalization of that area. So I guess it was last summer, I was looking along with the music instructor at Gadsden State. We were looking to find a place that we could do maybe something similar. And we were looking at a property, hoping that maybe we could move Gadsden State's music department, into a community in Gadsden that you could call it underprivileged. It's a minority community that really has lacked the kind of access to all of the things that a thriving community should have, cultural opportunities, investments. So what we saw this project doing was taking these sort of cultural things that we asked that community to come and experience. We asked them to come to, Gadsden State or to other places, but what we wanted to do was say, how about we bring it to you and this be a part of your community? So that was the genesis of this idea. And in looking for properties, I came upon this factory, this former mill, and the vision grew beyond just the music center. The music center is still part of it, but there's so much more potential in this space. So you can You can look this project up. It's towncreekvillage.org. So basically, it's going to be a facility that promotes the arts, entrepreneurship, continuing education, community agriculture, and we want it to be a revitalizing project for this neighborhood. It's a grand property. So this is a 10-acre property, and the structure is 180,000 square feet. If you've ever been to Low Mill in Huntsville, you could look at this and immediately sort of see the vision of what we're wanting to do, except bringing in the ideas of this being an entrepreneur center and a workforce development center, and a sort of fusion of those ideas and the arts coming together. Here's an image of the interior. It's basically a wide open space. So what we want to do is come in, and where you see the window walls, we will create artist studios and maker spaces. So you could have a 1-window studio, 2 or 3. So we'll build these out to suit. And we hope to have, about 100 studios. We're also going to create office spaces and maker spaces. And we're talking with several partners to come in and help facilitate a business incubator program, so that we can concentrate resources in that facility so that people will have access to legal advice, financial accounting advice. People at the Chamber of Commerce will act as mentors. So we're really working on that kind of framework, and we think we've got a partnership in place that will really help us accelerate that. But we're also going to be partnering with higher education. So Gadsden State Community College, the University of Alabama Gadsden Center, and Jacksonville State University. What we want to do there is have opportunities for the community to engage in continuing education classes, from a broad range of categories, whether it be entrepreneurship or creative arts or gardening or you name it. So we want it to be this sort of point of access that, could even lead to further education down the road. We want to have a residency program, so we will be looking to bring in nationally recognized artists, makers, and scholars. That can include entrepreneurs to come and work in the facility. We will give them a space to work on their research. That will include a studio if they're an artist, or a workspace if they're an entrepreneur, along with on-site housing. So I'll mention that in just a moment. I think a really big part of what we're going to be doing is the community agriculture. The 10-acre grounds at the back of the facility is just an amazing spot that is really unlimitless in terms of what could happen. When we first looked at it, my wife and I said, wow, we could, how many greenhouses could we put in here? But what we want it to be is we want it to be a community organized and community run agricultural program that not only provides access for the community, to healthy food, but also could service markets that would be on site and could work with our food and entrepreneur components. I mentioned that we want to have the music center. So we'll have retail spaces. We hope to have several restaurants. We definitely want to have a test kitchen, a bakery, and even sort of work with the idea of maybe incubating food trucks on the property. And then an important component is going to be the affordable housing that we have there. So we want to build out these efficiency suites so that we can attract potential entrepreneurs. What we're looking at doing is, this is for Gadsden, but it's also to reach out to people around the country who might be wanting to start a business or might be wanting to start a creative practice, but can't necessarily afford to have the studio and living space in a larger urban area. And so we're going to have these price points that are affordable, and we will use that as a way to recruit people to come and start a business or come and start your creative practice. So just a little bit of an idea of how it's going to be broken down. So we'll have a performing arts center. Connected with that will be all sorts of workforce training. So learning audio engineering and lighting and video. There'll be a recording studio connected with that, and then educational classes. And then there's all of the sort of wide open space that we will subdivide into offices and studios. You can see the test kitchen. And then there's a space that we really haven't figured out. It's about 25,000 square feet. We know we want to do some hot things out there, whether it's a metal shop or a fabricating space or a foundry. So this is an interior view of the Ellis Marcellus Center in New Orleans. They allowed us to get a copy of their blueprints, and we were able to superimpose that on the square footage of the warehouse at one end of the property, and we're able to develop this footprint so it would fit beautifully into the existing space. You can see just an example of how we'll build out the studio spaces. This is an image from Low Mill. So they already have something like this working there, except it's just artist studios. All right, that's it in a nutshell. I'm going to see if I can get to hand this back off to you.
Okay, yeah, if you'd go ahead and send the host back to me. Do you have time for questions? Because I know we ran over it and you said you had to go.
I do have time.
Okay, real quick, everybody knows how to do it. Just raise your hand. I believe, did you transfer host back to me?
All right.
I'm the host now. So yeah, I'll go ahead and call on him. And Mario, I'll read the name out for you.
Okay.
If they ask. Not of the person who asked the question. So if you